All right, welcome here, guys. Thank you, Chris Snook. Super excited here to be with you and the Digital Soldiers community. Thanks, Nicole, for organizing this. Thanks for all of you for being part of this. We'll start with the good news right out of the gate, because that way, if you don't watch the whole thing, you'll at least know how to do this. If you are interested in a special unpublished promotion, if you're finding out about the Inevitable World Summit, which we'll be talking a lot about today, but we talk about the context and the content and the people coming, but also why it matters and why it might be something you'd be interested in spending a weekend of your time with us doing in February. The good news is that there's already early bird sales. Those ticket sales are 31 and 41% off the retail price for the next 10 days, I believe, or whatever it is, until we hit February 1. They will go up $50 and they'll still be discounted. But the good news is, regardless of when you buy, if you buy now or if you buy in a week or whenever, you will save an additional 35% if you use this code. And this code is capital D with digital, capital S, no space, soldiers. So if you put digital soldiers with a capital D and a capital S and no space between those words at the checkout, it's going to knock off another 35% off of the already discounted price. If you're one of our affiliates, you're going to make 30% on whatever that final number is. And so that's a promotion. That's a coupon code that will literally be used only by your group. And only by anyone in Nicole's and the broader community of digital soldiers. You guys can use that up until the event. And as promoters or as people affiliating the ticket sales and bringing some of your teams and some of your leaders to the event for getting a PhD in a weekend on the future, then they'll be able to save an additional 35%. So the sooner they buy, the better, because then they're saving even more money because the tickets are already discounted leading up into the event. But that's the promotion. And I say that up front because you don't even know what you're buying yet. But I say that so that if you stay along, you at least know what to do to get the promotion. So there that is. Let's start about why we're here. The Inevitable Group is an organization of interdependent peer-to-peer marketers, influencers, and technologists. And Digital Soldiers is one of our tribes, one of the communities that optionally participates in helping us meet our mission, which our mission, independent of who's helping us, is to empower 1 million people to a living wage in the digital economy by no later than 2025. What is a living wage? A living wage means you're not in poverty. A living wage means that you don't have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet in a house you don't love. Doesn't mean you live in a mansion. It means that you can afford your life without using credit card debt and things like that, and that you actually have some chance at some point of being financially retired. Most of you that are entrepreneurial will probably never be emotionally or cognitively retired, meaning you'll probably do something creative with your life regardless. But it would be nice to be financially retired. Some of you already are financially retired, but you're in asset classes that may be changing. And so you're trying to figure out, how do I hedge against these potential future disruptions in the current monetary system and not take undue risk in this emerging crypto token economic system, right? And so regardless of how you're coming into this, understand that who we are as a collective, and you can read about this more at the inevitablechallenge.com. So just go to inevitablechallenge.com, and you can read about the mission and kind of the broader thing. Now, the Inevitable World Summit is our February 26th to 28th gathering, and we gather twice a year. This one is purely virtual. I'm going to mute everybody. This one is purely virtual. But the typical version that we do is we do a virtual and a hybrid, meaning there's an in-person component with a live stream globally. Our last event that is a different one, but in the nonprofit space, was called the Wyoming Technology Stampede. It's coming into its 4th year, but that last event, as an example, had a couple hundred people in live in Wyoming under COVID and with all the right restrictions. And it had 4,387 people, I think, from 97 countries tune in globally. So we're bringing information to the masses in a way that is curated to the best of our ability, with technologies that are at scale and leadership teams that are looking for people that can help drive mass awareness, mass education, and mass adoption of these user interfaces and these technologies. So what we're going to talk about today is, what's the context. Now, it's important that everybody starts out with understanding that I'm not here to tell you to accept everything I say as truth, because that's certainly not the point. It's important you understand my biases, and maybe some of them will match with yours. Maybe some of them will be different. I like to disclose my biases up front, where they come from, so that you can accept or consider before you reject what these things are, and see how they fit. Try them on, see if they fit your life, your needs, your desire. I don't expect anybody to take what I'm saying as gospel, because it's not. Okay, it's been shaped over 20 some odd years of being an entrepreneur, being an investor, and reading a lot of books. Some of these books you've probably read. So what are some of the foundational things that have shaped my bias, Chris's bias in general, about where we are and where we're heading? The Watchman's Rattle, The Fourth Turning, Connectography by Parag Khanna, The Creature from Jekyll Island, I know many of you have read, Science of Getting Rich, for those who are in the personal development world, by Wallace Wattles, Trillions by Mickey McManus, about this emerging IoT digital layer of machines that are learning from us and each other in record pace, and setting a new reality that treats us each differently at scale, and sometimes changes the facts that we all think we agree on at scale, which we're seeing evidence of in the mainstream. And then supplemental things from The Business of Blockchain by Gartner, Misbehavior of Markets, The Everything Bubble. You can see some of these. So The Future is Asian, The Big Debt Crisis by Dalio. A lot of these books have themes in them, and Technology versus Humanity by Gerd Leonhardt, another great one looking at the mega shifts and the mega trends that are happening. I also wrote a book with a guy named Travis Wright, who has a couple different shows. One's called the Bad Crypto Podcast, which has been a great podcast in the community for the last 3 years. And then a new one that's taken off like a rocket called The Nifty Show, which is all about digital collectibles. Travis and I wrote a book called Digital Sense in 2017. We wrote that book for large scale organizations, and specifically companies focused on putting the customer in the center of their business. So that book was focused on helping organizations from Shiseido, which is in a beauty space, to Bank of America, to several different people figure out, how do I actually build a business model where the customer is the asset, and why should I do that? And so again, these are things that are my bias, and you should understand that bias, so that you can take what I say and rub it against yours and think. Now, thinking, as Henry Ford once said, is the hardest work that any of us can do. And it's getting harder, right? Because we think, but actually what we're doing, even thinkers, is we're reacting because this thing's buzzing at us in our hand or on our screen. And it's feeding us more of our current biases, because as we hit like, as we hit subscribe, as we watch a movie and we don't bounce out, everything from Netflix to Amazon Prime is measuring the metadata to a level of our attention graph over time and over genre and everything else. And it is then feeding us what it thinks we want. And the challenge with that is they've done studies now that says you could take someone not on social media from the third world, put them on any social media planet. Doesn't matter which one it is. Doesn't matter if it's WhatsApp. Doesn't matter if it's Telegram. Doesn't matter if it's Facebook. Anything where they can join groups of people and follow conversations. You can put them on any social media platform on the planet, and within 6 months, radicalize them left or right. And the reason you can do that is because we are fed a compounding of our bias that continues to just go in one direction. Now, I'm not here to tell you which way is better, because I don't know. What I do know is it's harder and harder to think, right? And in order for us to actually move this planet forward in a positive way, what we're going to do is we're going to have to learn how to deal with exhaust at a level that we've never dealt with it before. 400 zettabytes. Zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabytes. I had to look that up. All right. What's a trillion? A trillion is 1,000,000 million. So how do you make $1 million? You make 1,000 times. How do you make $1 billion? You make $1 million 1,000 times. How do you make $1 trillion? You make $1 million 1,000,000 times. 1 zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabytes, right? Gigabytes is storage. Most of us know what a gigabyte is because we've tried to download a gigabyte file or whatever. Kind of understand that. 400 zettabytes is 400 trillion gigabytes of data waste in 2018. This is a 2-year-old stat. I don't have the current one, or I'd be sharing that one with you. You can understand it's probably far higher if you understand Metcalfe's law and if you understand Moore's law, right, about compounding and doubling every 6 to 12 months and different things, right? So 400 zettabytes was Cisco's number of data exhaust. That's the data that nothing was done with, that you and I as human beings, 7.8 billion of us on this planet, were throwing off just by going about our day, even if all we did was carry our phone in our pocket. Because it's taking our geo steps, it's taking our time of day, it's taking our weather patterns, it's taking our semantics, it's taking our voice data. This is all waste. It's not being done with. 1 to 2% of that 400 zettabytes was actually mined. And in the last couple of years, we've created the top 5 companies are all data and tech companies, right? Amazon, Facebook, the market cap, Tesla, right? So 400 zettabytes of data waste, right? That's an input. Now, how do we think about that? I don't know. You can start to think about it, right? But what Gerd tells us is that these colonial people are us in one way. In the next 20 years, which means between now and 2041, humanity will experience more change than the prior 300 years combined. So go back 300 years, 1721. We'd probably dress like these folks, right? If we dressed like these folks, we would have been opulent. This was the upper class in 1721. And if you think about what they didn't have running water in their house. They didn't have electricity in their house. They didn't have a lot of things, right? They read by candlelight. They slept under animal skin rugs. They woke up by a rooster or the sunlight. That was just normal. There was no mass transportation. They had a horse or they didn't. They had a buggy or they didn't. And they worked on a farm all day. They grew their own food. They did all that. So think about that. That was their normal. Now think about they go to bed and they wake up the next morning. They wake up the next morning and there's a drone flying overhead delivering packages. And there's an alarm clock called an iPhone that does a bunch of different things I don't understand going off to wake them up instead of a rooster. When they step out of the bed, there's lights and electricity and a television to watch. And there's blankets with 400 thread count sheets. And they walk outside the door and there's freeways and gravel and road and cars. How would you feel if you went to bed under candlelight and you woke up in that scenario? And why that's an important metaphor is because that's how all of us will feel over the next 20 years, even though we're comfortable with smartphones, with technology, because that same rate of change is coming over 2 decades from where we are today. Now, if you think about that, and you're not wondering if you need to get yourself in front of new information, then I don't know what to tell you, right? And so the problem isn't getting in front of new information, it's just how can I verify whether that information is real or not? And that's what happened starting in 2017. Now, if you've read books like The Fourth Turning, which talks about these generational cycles and these 4 turnings, winter, spring, summer, and fall, for those who like the theoretical ones, then none of this is new. It happens every 80 to 100 years, and none of us live through all 4 cycles because we're born in one, we die usually between the 3rd and the 4th. If you live 100 years, you've actually made it through all 4, but you don't remember the first 15 years of the first one you were born in. You were shaped by the 2nd and 3rd, and you die in the 4th when you're too old to do anything about it except tell people to watch out for the next one. And so why history repeats itself is because these cycles repeat. Well, one of the things that happened in 2017, but it happened at scale, was trust got in crisis. And now I'm not saying anything that you don't know, right? But this is now at a whole new model because of social media, because of algorithms. We now not only have trust in crisis, and the US was leading the way in that. In other words, Americans trust less than anybody else on the planet, according to this data from Edelman's Global Trust Survey, right? And so what you have is you have these different things converging. You have a rate of change that's exponential. We are in the vertical part of the curve, and human beings don't deal well with vertical, right? If I asked you whether to take $1 million right now or a penny doubled for the next 30 days, choose. Most of you know it's probably a trick question, but it's really hard if you try and do the math, and I gave you 5 seconds to leave money on the table. So you'd go 1 penny, 2 pennies, 4 pennies, 8 pennies, and your brain would go out about 7 or 8 days, and you'd still be at like 32 cents, and you go, oh, give me the million, right? And what you would leave is about $4.2 million on the table. But where you don't see that doubling take off is until day 28. And then it goes from 844 to 1.6 to 3.2 to 6.4. And so that exponential curve, the doubling of the doubling, doesn't make sense to a linear mind. And this is our challenge, is that we've been dealing with exponential technologies. And as Rebecca Costa, who wrote the book The Watchman's Rattle, said, a friend of mine, we produced shows with her back in 2012, wonderful lady, very smart, studies essentially human capabilities against technology. And one of her quotes was, we are dealing with Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And that's what we're living with, right? We're not that far out of the cave as humans. We like to think we are because we can dress ourselves and we can do smart things and we can hop on Zooms. But from an emotional standpoint, right, we're still reptiles. We're still apes. And we get into fight or flight very quickly. And now we have social media algorithms, we have internet, we have email, we have all these ways to communicate at scale. And all they do is trigger our emotion, because it gets us to do stuff. And there's other studies that have been done that if the last thing you do is look at your phone at night and the thing that wakes you up in the morning is your phone alarm, you literally exhaust all your long thinking sugars before 9 a.m. And now you're going into the office and you're now making critical decisions. And so that scares the hell out of me. Should scare you. How do you restore your cognition? You get outside for an hour a day. You take deep, long breaths. You leave the phone away from you. That's not off, literally not in the same room for at least an hour a day. You walk in nature. That's the only way you can restore those long-term sugars, right? But it is something that you can do that's super pragmatic. Now, you couple that with this war on wealth that's been existing forever, right? That is a centralized monetary system that has served progress and growth. We have a much more prosperous world today, much more people today living out of poverty than before. And yet, we also have a broken system, as most of you know. And again, let's not argue the conspiracy theories or the others. Let's just look at facts. The facts are we have a monopoly on money. 25% of the world's GDP is American, and 80% of the settlements occur in US dollars. That has benefited America in major ways since 1945, when the Bretton Woods Agreement was inked. As we've gone off of Bretton Woods with 1971 and some of the other things that removed the gold standard and then all this other stuff, what we've kept in place is we've kept in place this Federal Reserve based system. Now, we only have had that since 1913 when the amendment got passed. We've only had the IRS since 2 short years later. Why? Because they had to collateralize the citizenship so that the money, which is debt, that got put into the system had a collateral. And that's why we pay taxes. Prior to that, you still had an industrial age disparity of wealth. You had the Carnegies of the world and the Rockefellers of the world with all the money, and then you had the working class. But there was no taxes being paid because money was not being minted from a centralized bank, right? And so that was lending it to our government, right? And so the origination of fiat by decree it's not about whether by decree is right or wrong. It's just all fiats have at some point gone to zero. If you look at history, all fiats go to zero. Now, could the US dollar be different? It would be the first time in thousands of years that a fiat didn't go to zero at some point. Is it going to happen in our lifetime? Probably not. Maybe. Who knows? That's not the point. The point is this war on wealth is about have and have-nots, and the gap is getting wider and wider. When we created things in the 90s, like getting off Glass-Steagall and getting off things and allowing banks that were retail to also become investment banks under the Clinton era, we saw the impacts of that in the Bush era. Well, we're going to see the same kind of impacts that we had from the Obama and the Trump era in the next era. And the politicians on the left are always going to blame the ones on the right. And the ones on the right are always going to blame the ones on the left. And these things take decades to materialize. The point is, do you understand how any of this crap works? And if you don't, you should be in the event in February 26th and 28th, because you'll start to. You should read some of these books. Those are next to free or very low money. If you've already read those books, you should start to think about how to talk about these things. When you have centralized authorities, you don't have something totally wrong either, right? So a lot of times the war of religions in economic theory takes place too. And the war on religions has to do with centralize everything or decentralize it all. Well, nature, which is the longest standing success story in any recorded history, billions of years of staying here, this planet, right? We're not a success story. We've lasted maybe 10,000 years. How much longer we last is kind of up to us, but also not, because we've already done some damage that may or may not be reparable, which is why we need to find other planets to live on. We're 10,000 years old. So that's a success story. We're unique in that way. The planet we live on and reside is billions and billions of years old. Mother Nature always wins. And Mother Nature will always win. And the thing to know about Mother Nature is at the lowest level, it's peer-to-peer. And at the highest level, it's centralized, right? Last time I checked, there's one sun that provides us and the rest of the planets in this solar system energy. That's a centralized system. Now, is that bad? Hell no, it's not bad, right? It's good. It works. So centralization has a purpose. It's efficient. It creates order, right? And heaven, Mother Nature, the universe, however you want to organize to it, the first law of all those things is order. And when there's chaos, things will eventually line up in order. And when people are confused, they revert to habit, because habit gives them order, even if that order is taking them down a destructive path or a path that is no longer viable. So understand that order is the first law of the universe, the first law of Mother Nature, the first law of heaven, however you want to do it. Centralization plays a fundamental role in that, but peer-to-peer, decentralized networks, they serve another purpose. When you get a cut on your ankle, it doesn't require your whole brain to deal with it, right? At a cellular level, at the ankle level, it's peer-to-peer. Those scabs, those hemoglobins, those things are forming at a peer-to-peer level. At a cellular level, they are forming peer-to-peer. They're decentralized from the rest of your body. That's why the rest of your body on a small little cut on your ankle or something like that doesn't go into shock and doesn't go into shutdown mode, because if it was centralized purely, then it would have to. Since it's not, it can deal with it at a peer-to-peer level. The rest of your body can function fine, right? So what I'm getting at the sense that decentralization is important at a certain piece of the puzzle. Centralization also plays a role. This is not a binary decision of one versus the other. This is, where is one being applied, and is it the right way to apply it in that solution? So when you think about identity, let's talk about identity, because we're going to be spending a lot of time about self-sovereignty at the event. Why is that so important? Because at the identity level, the self, I am sovereign to myself by nature. By nature, I am me. I'm one of a kind. You are you. You're one of a kind. Now, as we've created order to create systems and mass control, we have created other identities as a way to recognize, verify, and distribute with some level of certainty information in a more accurate way. So when the IRS gets formed after the Federal Reserve Act gets passed, because they need to collateralize the citizens before they print the money that puts the country in debt, that then gets circulated as currency, they need to create a way, a social security system, to identify us so that they know who to tax and who not to tax. So the social security system gets invented, and that becomes an identity structure. That's not who I am. That's not who you are, but it became a very centralized way to identify Chris or identify you so that they could do certain things. And then when they started to go, well, now we've created this whole market economy on top of this, and these people need to transact, it became very inefficient and risky to put that fundamental government issued identity, not the identity of you as a sovereign individual, soulful being, but as a person residing under a flag. As they put that into the market, they had to figure out a way to tokenize, wrap a container around the actual thing so that the actual thing wouldn't be at risk when scaling its participation in the marketplace. So what are some of these examples? A driver's license, which is not your social security number, but ties to your government ID. That's another form of a government ID that says this is the state that you reside in, and this is the fact that you've passed the test that allows you to operate a moving vehicle above 25 miles an hour. That's a tokenized effort of your government-issued centralized identity. Another tokenized effort, 16 digits on your MasterCard or your Visa or your Amex, right? All pegged back to your government-issued identity, your centralized authority identity, that represents a portion of or a lot of your actual soulful identity, but isn't it? And then tokenizes it so that if your card gets stolen, you don't have to start all over at the centralized level. You just have to reissue a new 16-digit code that tokenizes the more permanent government-issued code. So if this is making sense to you, you understand tokenization is not limited to crypto. This has been around forever. PCI compliance, which started in the 90s in the credit card business, was the first rapid scale of tokenizing identity. And it's taken for granted all day long because you and I swipe our credit cards, we lose them, we cancel them, we do this, we don't think about it. Why does that matter? Because we now live in a world where hacks of large centralized systems that store these tokenized data structures of our identity have become super profitable. It's worth doing. Whether it's right to do or not, it's obvious. It's not right to do, but it's worth doing for people who want to do it. And so what's happened is our identity has become more and more over the last 100 years subject to the government's version of who we are. Now, the government's version of it does serve a purpose, and it's not unimportant. It's just that it's not who we are. As social media has proliferated and given us the ability to not only read and write, but also engage and communicate and shape the communities we live in, it's also given us a way to online establish meta identities into different edge networks, different communities that aren't connected to each other. So there's Chris, who he actually is, the soulful being, that version that's residing in this meat suit that at some point, hopefully after 90, will leave this planet and go somewhere else, energy into form, out of form, through form. But this meat suit will evaporate, right? My identity won't, it'll just change form. And so what is the representation of that identity now? And then how does it communicate with others in a marketplace so that it can live and thrive and succeed? Well, that's gotten more complex because now I have my government issued identity. And then I also have these edge networks that I participate in, everything from my church to my fuzzy friends group on gamer night or whatever the thing is, right? And the things that I don't tell people about and the things that I'm happy to tell people about, the public-private side. And so as these complexities emerge, what's happened is now our identity has been centralized even further. I've been able to Facebook Connect for the last decade, which saves me time. Centralization is about saving time. It's about efficiency. Well, Facebook Connect made it so I didn't have to go create 50 different logins. But what it did for Facebook was it created a centralized identity marker of who Chris or who you are. And then it mapped your likes, your dislikes, your logins, your networks to that in a way to take a very micro-targeted genius idea to serve ads that are relevant and likely to convert better than anybody else ever could. And so the more I Facebook connected, the more I gave Facebook data on outside of Facebook's network, what else I did, which made them easier to market to advertisers that wanted to hyper target someone in their network who also perceived and lived and had identities outside their network that were not yet shared. For you and I, it just became a time saver. So we did it, but we didn't own it. And now people are starting to realize they don't own it. They don't own their government ID. Well, that's not really something you're going to change, but you can change your social fabric identity. You can own the encryption and the data around that. And it doesn't mean you're not participating in social networks. It doesn't mean you're not smoking cigarettes. It means you're aware of the risks. And then you're choosing to live sovereign to yourself within whatever risk profile you choose to live in. And you're also in control of being able to change that should you change the risk profile you want to live in. And you're able to get back what is ultimately yours, which is your right to dictate and delegate who can see the data you generate and who cannot. And so when you think about decentralized ID as a concept, as a thing, it's an open source protocol, meaning there's a lot of different versions of decentralized ID out there. Now, that's a fragmented market. So ultimately what that means is fragmentation must always find order. It always will. There will always be winners and losers, right? In every big shift. And fragmentation must find order. Right now, decentralized ID is a new concept. It's a working protocol. It's applicable by multiple companies that can use it. Ultimately, it'll find order. Now, what you want to know is you want to know how can I do something one time and then likely have the ability to port that with me as things evolve and change, because we know that change is constant, right? Change is inevitable. That's part of the theme of the Inevitable World Summit. Change is inevitable. If you, as a sovereign individual, as a sovereign participant in a marketplace, or marketplaces will be inevitable, then not only do you need to get your butt to the event and understand how you can do that, but more importantly than that, you just have to understand that change is inevitable, so you are inevitable if you learn how to live with and embrace change. Somebody said to me years ago that human beings don't resist change, but every single one of us resists being changed. And if you really noodle on that for a minute, you'll realize that's exactly what happens. When you want to change, you don't have any friction. When something or someone does something that forces you to change how you orient to them, it's usually uncomfortable. It's usually something you immediately resist until you kind of have a chance to maybe put your arms down and embrace it. But the immediate response, that reptilian one, right, is to resist change. But we don't really actually resist change. We just resist change we didn't prepare for. We resist change that is thrust upon us before we've had a chance to embrace it. We don't resist the change we want to make. We run at that. everything from New Year's resolution or resolution to anything else, right? So decentralized identity, it's something you need to really understand. What it does is it gives you a way to take a centralized kind of concept and actually own it sovereign to yourself. A master key that you own, that is issued only and solely to you and sustained through a network of other people who are sovereign, but there's no one to call if you lose it. Sure, you could start again and reissue, but you'd lose everything that was underneath that master delegate key. So it becomes your responsibility. But you know what? That also becomes your freedom. The more responsibility we abdicate to others, the less free we are. And there's a trade-off there that makes sense in certain cases. But we've gotten to a point where the pendulum's kind of swung in a direction where, without realizing it, we've kind of been co-opted into these network effects that we didn't really know. And so I believe we're actually living in the next big social cultural revolution. And I think it started somewhere around 2010. It may have started around 2008. It may have started before that, but I think we've been about a decade into the major shift, this next social cultural revolution. So what is culture? Culture is simply defined as group habit. That's all it is. Think about it this way. It's always the other person with the accent. When I first got to California after graduating undergrad, I went out there from the Trenton, New Jersey, kind of New York, Philadelphia area, and I said coffee, and I said certain things. And when I got to California, they said, "Where are you from?" I was the guy who was different. Now, what did they sound like to me? They sounded different to me. Right? So culture is nothing but group habit. When everybody says coffee, it doesn't sound weird. When one person says it, they're different. They're not of that culture. Right? When people have a British accent, same kind of thing. When they're walking around London, no one thinks they're different. When they come over here, we instantly give them 20 points more smarter IQ, even if they're the dumbest person on the block, right? Because of the hierarchy of we came out of Britain, right? So there's like this weird relationship. Got a British accent, you're better looking and smarter. Doesn't matter what your teeth look like. It's always the other guy with the habit. Why does that matter? Because right now we're living in a massive cultural social revolution. And that means that we are shifting, or we are seeing a sea change of group habits, and we're seeing them conflict with each other. There's people that want to make America great again. There's people that think it's already great enough. There's thinking we want to build it back better. And again, I am not taking a side here, because that is the dumbest thing you can do, in my opinion. You are entitled to your beliefs. I'm entitled to mine. Pragmatism wins, right? Ideology is important. It's our right to have ideology, but it also can be in our way, and it creates conflict. And conflict is a necessary part of design. So this future that we're all moving in requires these things. It requires these two sides of the coin. But ultimately, in order for us to not be destructive, there has to be some level of understanding that the difference of opinion is actually part of the creative process. And that if we can give nothing but respect to the fact that we have cultural group habits that are in conflict, that we can look for where they're not. We look for the common thread that we're actually fighting about, which is forward progress. And at some point, rational minds can enter the conversation. Now, the algos have made it a lot harder, which is why you're seeing things like racism come up at levels that are rivaling 100 years ago. And we go, how could that happen? Because the algos are compounding and feeding us more of what we want to see at increasing scale. And we think that we're being informed, but actually we're being weaponized in ignorance. And you say, how do we start? Well, I believe when you start by making people sovereign to themselves, when they actually know that in a digital world, they can take control of their identity, and they can start to take back control across whatever ecosystems they choose to participate in or not, that's a great place to start. And once they have decentralized identity, they can start to own things truly in a digital world. What do I mean by that? In 1999, most of you were alive. Some of you may not have been, but in 1999, most of you were alive. And you may have recalled what I call the Napster moment. And up until then, musicians and artists and people like that made money selling music. And after then, it became increasingly harder and almost impossible in a few short years to make money selling music. When they sold music, you got it on a 8-track, you got it on a vinyl, you got it on a tape, or you got it on a CD. You owned something. Now that thing could get ruined or scratched and you'd have to replace it. But once you bought it for $20, it was yours. It didn't evaporate. It wasn't centralized. You paid a price and you could play it as many times or as few times as you wanted. And unless you lost it, it couldn't be taken away from you. Fast forward 10 years. You're buying a download for 99 cents. You're buying a movie on Amazon Prime for $19.99 so you can watch it opening weekend. And you own a unlimited access to watch that movie as many times as you want versus the $3.99 or $5.99 option that lets you rent it for 48 hours. So you think you own it, but you don't own it because you can't actually do what you want with it. Can't take it to another platform. Can't take it to somebody else's house and play it without logging into your own account. You can't use it anywhere else. And if all of a sudden the rights deals between a centralized authority at Amazon and HBO change, you don't have to be disclosed. It just disappears from your library, but you don't get your $20 back. And so what we've shifted to is this world where we've demonetized, we digitalized content as one example. And then we dematerialized it, meaning we made it so efficient to deliver without the physical thing that the cost model changed and it became easier to do at scale. So now we had 1,000 songs in our pocket versus 12 on a Sony Walkman and a tape, right? And then that went to 10,000 songs at the same incremental cost. So these orders of magnitude became more efficient and they gave us things, but they also took away things. They took away our ability to own it. Well, that's just one example. That's happened across every single thing in the last 20 years. But what's happened alongside of that is industries have had to adapt and shift and figure out how to stay in business or go out of business or continue to earn a living. So what took off was the only thing that was scarce. We now had to build attention and trust as the ultimate currency because we couldn't sell the music. We had to use the music to sell attention. And attention got consumed by advertising dollars. And we went into a hardcore CPM model, cost per million, right? And depending on how good someone was at holding our attention graph, they got remunerated more. So then you took NFL teams that were worth 147 million, like the Dallas Cowboys in 1989, that are now worth 5.5 billion and haven't won a damn championship in 20 years. How? Because content became dematerialized, eyeballs and attention became the value, and the only form of content over the last decade that was able to hold advertisers' model in the old world was live sports, because there was a social movement that I was at risk of losing if I watched it on replay. It got ruined for me because even if I wanted to Devo it or TiVo it or whatever, back when that was still a thing, I couldn't watch it without having it spoiled for me because I had a phone in my pocket since 2010 that buzzed me on Twitter and Facebook and everything else with my friends going, "Oh my God, I hate that. Can you see that play? Do you believe that, bro?" And even if I wanted to tune out of it, I couldn't. And so it was ruined for me. So the only way that I could enjoy it and not lose my social network in real life was to watch it live. Well, as I watched that live, I stopped watching Friends live. I stopped watching Grey's Anatomy live because those things now became available on demand and I could put them on my schedule. And the water cooler moment didn't require me to do it anymore on Thursday at 9. And so as everything else became less valuable, networks still needed to keep advertisers. And the only thing they could keep them with was buying the rights to broadcast live sports. And so live sports get premium, and now the contracts get premium, and now the values of the teams get premium, and now the merch gets premium, and now the players get paid more. It's called the law of compensation, the need for what I do, my ability to fill that need, and how replaceable I am by something else. And sports became very hard to replace, as an example. So this is how this stuff plays out. Now, I'm way long in the tooth here, going down all kinds of rabbit holes. But what I'm trying to tell you is that when we're talking about why you want to come to the Inevitable World Summit is we've organized people that are on the next wave of what I call the great remonetization. The great news is this: the last 20 to 30 years have been a dematerialization, a demonetization, a remonetization with a broken business model called advertising that has created societal problems, a threat to democracy at scale globally, and a lot of other second order consequences that now are ready for a true shift. And that true shift starts with people taking back their digital life, because there's no way they're not going to live in a digital world at this point. That cat is out of the bag and it's never going back. And so now we get back to first principles and we say, well, what about identity? If I am in a digital world and I live in all these edge networks, is there a way for me to do that with the consent that I deserve? Because back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, when shows like Dallas were highlighting the oil boom, right? There was a knowledge that if I had oil in my backyard, I was going to be rich. And I didn't even have to know how to mine it or drill it or do whatever, because my ocean of oil under my backyard was going to be leasable by someone who did want to do it. And I could make a royalty for letting them have the mineral rights to drill in my backyard. Well, what most of us are starting to wake up and realize, but hadn't for the last decade, is Google, Amazon, Facebook, every company that you can think of today that sells you a product that connects or has an app, put an oil well in your living room without permission. Matter of fact, you paid them to do it. And what that oil well is doing is it's capturing metadata on you, and it's not all nefarious, right? It's about efficiencies. But what it's done is it's put an oil well called a Nest between your master bedroom and your kitchen without you getting a payment for it. Matter of fact, they're the ones keeping all the rewards as shareholder value goes through the moon. And they learn more about you and your spouse's kinesthetic data than anybody without ever walking into your home. It's the Alexa that learns your voice patterns, your music tastes, your shopping needs, your shopping list, whether it's on or off, right? You bought that thing. It's number one selling gift 2 Christmases ago. You're not getting paid for that. And it goes on and on and on. And the most ubiquitous one is the thing in your pocket that you're probably listening to me on right now. And you're never getting rid of that. And the one thing those things all have in common is a couple things. They all require identity. And that identity has been given to you as an Apple ID or a Gmail ID or a Facebook Connect. And that identity is in a centralized silo of 4 to 5 big tech companies that own your encryption and own your data. So is it encrypted? Sure. But you can't decide when it gets unencrypted, and you don't even have to be notified when that happens. Equifax got hacked, and 147 million Americans were exposed with all the personal data. And the article said Equifax hack exposes 147 million customers to a data breach. And anyone thinking went, wait a minute, I'm not a customer of data. I'm not a customer of Equifax. I don't pay them any money. I didn't ask to be part of Equifax. I'm their damn product. Because the FICO score, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, is made up of 3 data agencies that collect your creditworthiness. Is he moving closer to bankruptcy or further away? That's all the FICO score measures is, are you moving closer or further away from bankruptcy? And then it rates you and it tells people what to charge you or not for an interest rate. You're not their customer. You're their product. So when they get hacked, you're screwed and you're not even getting any benefit from them, except for your ability to go access credit, maybe. So when we live in a world where we don't own our identity, we don't own the encryption, we don't own the data. Once we live in that, we can now own assets, we can create assets. We can publish our own music. We could dictate the terms. We could put smart contracts into the thing with blockchain. This is the world we're emerging into. And this is a multi-trillion-dollar market. Because this puts everything from fans and followers and creators and influencers into a model again where they can sell the art, where they can sell the talent, where they can actually monetize the real thing, not just their attention graph, where they can re-platform themselves by deplatforming off of the attention graph without losing their income in the process. Right now, everybody's a slave to either Instagram, Facebook, or whatever if they're famous, because either they're relevant and they're posting 15 times a day and communicating with their audience, only to have it potentially taken away from them at a will without any permission after all that investment, or they're irrelevant and not known because they're not in the top of mind. And so if they're rich enough to not care and they don't want a job, then they're not on social media. They're not on Instagram. They don't post all the time. Garth Brooks is the top selling musician of all time, made over $80 million a year on a show, on a platform called Talk Shop, selling his music, engaging with fans. He's got 1.6 million followers on Instagram. He doesn't need a job called posting every day to Instagram and acting important. He's rich. He's a musician. He doesn't want to be on Instagram. But other people have built their whole platform there because they're not him yet, but they're a slave to it. And then Instagram can decide they say something unimportant or they support the wrong thing and they can pull it away. That's not freedom. That's not equitable. So we are moving into a macro shift of decentralized identity coupled with decentralized networks where people can participate in marketplace and they can come and go and they're portable and they don't lose, and where they can be verified, not through a broken centralized system of multiple silos where they got to get KYC'd every 5 minutes by a different bank just for opening up a new account with a different platform. They could have it once and on their decentralized ID be KYC'd and verified, and then people could pay the person who originally did that KYC less than what it cost them to re-KYC me, and you and I don't have to hold up our license one more time and go, it's me, and wait 24 hours. These are the worlds we're moving into. This is inevitable. So that's why you want to come to the Inevitable World Summit. Why are you buying a ticket? Because for the first time in history that I'm aware of, Jean-Jacques Quixquater and Scott Stornetta, who are 50% of the references, there was only 9, in a 9-page white paper, a guy named Satoshi or a gal or a group who we'll never know, wrote in 2008 that set up a whole new decentralized monetary system, right? 50% of those references are speaking on stage for the first time in history about how they got here, where they think we're going. I'm certainly interested in hearing what they have to say. That alone would be worth attending. Now, you couple that with all the rest of the speakers, from Alex Mashinsky to Isaiah Jackson, who I just got off the phone, who wrote a book called Bitcoin and Black America, has been on CNBC nonstop for the last 2 weeks, talking about re-enfranchising marginalized communities. You have Charles Hoskinson, the co-founder of Cardano, who used to be the original CEO at Ethereum, was one of the original 8 that stood up Ethereum with Vitalik and Gavin and those guys, David Johnson. It goes on and on. Brittany Kaiser. I don't want to leave anybody out, but for a couple $100, you could spend a weekend hearing from these people. So if you thought anything that I said today was stimulating or interesting, where do you think I learned it from? How would you like to just go drink it from their mouth? So save yourself 35%. I'll take a couple questions. Now you know how to sell it, and you can use this video to do it. And let's fill some seats. That's all I got, Nicole.
Amazing. This is just absolutely incredible. I appreciate you, sharing this vision and taking your time to give people